Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Perhaps the next story about betrayal will be from your city. And we start. Tom Whitmore was standing in the bathroom, wiping his hands on a towel, when his gaze caught something small, shiny on the gray rug by the sink. He frowned, leaned over, and picked it up with his fingers, a tiny circle of foil torn from a packet of pills. One of those ones you squeeze out to get the pill out. At first, he didn't think much of it. In a house with two children, Ethan and Lily, anything could end up on the floor. But then his brain, accustomed to analyzing drawings and diagrams like an engineer, began to ask questions. Julia, his wife, was not taking any medications. At least he didn't know about it. And after his vasectomy 3 years ago, after Lily was born, when they decided 2 children was enough, she definitely shouldn't have been on birth control. Then what is it? Tom turned the foil over in his hands, feeling a cold, unpleasant sensation arising inside. He glanced at the mirror above the sink. His reflection looked back at him with tired eyes. Short brown hair, light stubble, wrinkles on his forehead that appeared earlier than he would have liked. 35 years old, 2 children, a heavy equipment repair business in the suburbs of Toronto, a life he built from the ground up. And Julia, his support, his partner. Or so he thought. He put the foil in his jeans pocket and left the bathroom. The house was quiet, a rare moment in their chaotic lives. Ethan, a 5-year-old whirlwind of energy, was in kindergarten, and 2-year-old Lily slept in her room under the care of Chloe, their outmate from Quebec. Julia had left for work an hour ago, in her glass tower in downtown Toronto, where she was an assistant to some big boss at a big law firm. Tom never went into details. She loved her job, and he trusted her. Until this moment. He walked down the creaky wooden stairs into the living room. Outside, the gloomy Canadian sky hung over their tidy house in Mississauga, a typical suburb with identical lawns and minivans in the driveways. Tom walked into the kitchen, poured himself some coffee from the coffee machine, and sat down at the table, staring at the mug. The foil in his pocket seemed to burn him through the fabric. He pulled it out and laid it on the countertop, examining it as if this small piece of metal could tell him the truth. "Chloe," he called, without taking his eyes off the find. A second later, Chloe appeared at the door, a short girl of about 20 with long blonde hair gathered in a messy ponytail. She was wearing jeans and a sweatshirt with the logo of Université Laval, where she studied before coming to them on an exchange program. "Yes, Tom?" she asked with a slight French accent, wiping her hands on a towel. "Lily is still sleeping, if anything. This is not yours, by any chance?" He nodded at the foil, trying to keep his voice even. Chloe stepped closer and squinted at the table. "No," she said, shrugging. "I don't accept anything like that. Maybe Ethan found it somewhere. He's always carrying trash from the street." "Maybe," Tom muttered, but other thoughts were already spinning in his head. Ethan was too small to handle the pill bottles, and Lily couldn't reach them at all. Only Julia remained. He took a sip of the coffee, but the taste seemed bitter, although he added sugar as usual. Thoughts began to spin faster. Julia has become somewhat distant in recent months. Cold, she came home later than before, citing projects and meetings. Her phone was always with her, even in the bathroom. She didn't leave it on the nightstand like before. Tom remembered last week when he caught her quickly putting the screen away when he entered the room. Then he shrugged it off. You never know. It was work correspondence. But now, "Tom, are you okay?" Chloe was still standing in the doorway, looking at him with slight concern. "Yes, everything is fine," he lied, forcing himself to smile. "I was just thinking." "Thank you, Chloe." She nodded and went back upstairs, leaving him alone. Tom clenched the foil in his fist, feeling the sharp edges dig into his palm. He didn't want to suspect Julia. They had been together for 10 years, ever since they met at a mutual friend's party at Ryerson University. She was slim, athletic, with a sharp mind and a cool sense of humor that captivated him. They built this life together: house, children, business. But what if it was all a lie? He stood up, walked to the sink, and threw the foil in the trash. But getting rid of thoughts was not so easy. Tom decided that he would not jump to conclusions. He is an engineer. He is used to working with facts, not speculation. But that little piece of tinfoil was the first crack in the foundation of his world, and he knew he couldn't just forget about it. Rain began to fall outside the window, beating on the glass with small drops. Tom stood at the sink, looking at the wet lawn, and felt something heavy, inevitably growing inside him. He had to find out the truth, and he will find out. The rain outside the window intensified, turning into a monotonous rustle that filled the silence of the house. Tom was still standing at the kitchen sink, looking at his hands, which were gripping the edge of the countertop so tightly that his knuckles were white. He tried to convince himself that the foil on the carpet was nothing, an accident, something that could be explained simply. But doubt had already settled inside him, sharp and cold, like a blade. He couldn't just sit there and wait for Julia to get home from work, so he could ask her directly. She might be lying, and he wasn't sure he was ready to hear a lie come from her lips. No, he needed proof. Facts. Something that would either confirm his worst fears or give him peace. Tom wiped his hands on his jeans and headed back to the bathroom. He closed the door behind him, clicking the lock. He didn't want Chloe to catch him doing what he was about to do. The bathroom was small but cozy, white tiles, a cabinet with a mirror above the sink, a laundry basket in the corner. He started by opening the locker. There were the usual things there: toothpaste, a razor, a couple of bottles of children's cough syrup. Nothing unusual. He closed the door and turned to the shelf above the toilet where Julia kept her things. Creams, shampoos, a box of tampons. Tom froze, looking at this box. It stood a little to the side, neatly closed, but something about its position seemed strange to him, as if it had recently been opened. He reached out, feeling like a thief in his own home, and took the box. It was light, almost empty. Tom opened the lid, expecting to see only a couple of tampons, but instead his gaze was drawn to a plastic bottle of pills tucked between two white cylinders. His heart skipped a beat. He pulled out the package, holding it with trembling fingers. It was birth control, the same one Julia had been taking before his vasectomy. He recognized them immediately. Small white tablets in a round foil package with several cells already squeezed out. Exactly the same as the piece of foil he found on the carpet. Tom stood staring at the pills and felt the floor disappear from under his feet. My head was buzzing, my thoughts were confused, but one of them made its way through the noise, clear and merciless. She is cheating. After the vasectomy, they didn't need birth control. They discussed this, laughed about how they could now live without worries. Julia herself said that she threw away the last package 3 years ago after Lily was born. Then why are they here? Hidden in a box of tampons, a place he would never have reached if not for this chance discovery. He placed the package on the edge of the sink and leaned against the wall, trying to breathe. The air seemed thick and heavy. Tom closed his eyes, but the image of Julia immediately appeared in front of them, her cold smile, the distant look with which she had looked at him in recent months. She had always been reserved, even at the best of times, but now this coldness seemed to him not just a character trait, but a mask. He remembered how she left in the morning, a quick kiss on the cheek, the smell of her perfume, something floral and sharp, and a phrase thrown over her shoulder. "Don't wait for me early, we have a meeting with Greg." Greg, her boss. Tom had never seen him, but the name came up more and more often in conversations. Greg said, Greg suggested, Greg wants me to stay late. It seemed normal at the time. She was an assistant, and bosses require time. But now, Tom opened his eyes and looked at the pills again. His mind, accustomed to logic and order, tried to find another explanation. Maybe this is old stock? No, the expiration date on the packaging was until 2027, too fresh. Maybe she forgot that she left them here, but why hide them in tampons? He clenched his fists, feeling his anger begin to replace his confusion. This was no accident. This was intentional. He heard footsteps on the stairs light. Quick. Chloe. Tom quickly put the package back into the box, closed it, and returned it to the shelf, trying to place it exactly the same as it was. The bathroom door was locked, but he still felt trapped. He turned on the tap and washed his face with cold water, trying to clear his thoughts. The reflection in the mirror looked alien. The eyes were red, the jaw tense. He wiped his face with a towel and left. Chloe stood in the hallway, holding her phone. "Lily is awake," she said, looking at him with slight curiosity. "You were in the bathroom for a long time. Everything is fine?" "Yes," he managed, forcing his voice to sound calm. "I just had a headache. I'll go to bed." She nodded, but something flashed in her gaze, maybe doubt, maybe just tiredness from work. Tom walked past her into the bedroom, closed the door, and collapsed on the bed. He lay looking at the ceiling and felt his heart pounding in his chest. Pills, contraceptives, hidden. It wasn't a mistake. This was evidence. He rolled over onto his side, pulling his knees up to his chest, as if that would numb the pain that was beginning to grow inside him. Julia, the woman he trusted, the mother of his children, she lied to him. How many? Months? Years? And with whom? Greg? Some colleague? Neighbor? Thoughts swirled around like a swarm of wasps, stinging him again and again. He remembered how she looked in the morning, a slender figure in a tight suit, her hair pulled back into a neat bun, the cold look she gave him before leaving. Then he thought she was just tired. Now he saw something else in it: indifference. Contempt, maybe. Tom stood up, went to the chest of drawers, and opened the drawer where her things lay. He didn't know what he was looking for: more evidence, letters, but there were only neatly folded t-shirts and a pair of socks. He slammed the drawer shut, feeling like a fool. If she really cheats, she won't leave any traces in plain sight. She's too smart for that, too calculating. He returned to the bed and sat down, putting his head in his hands. For the first time in his life, Tom Whitmore, a man who had always been strong for his family, for his business, for himself, felt like he didn't know what to do. He couldn't just ask her; she could deny everything, and he wasn't ready for this conversation without evidence. But he could not live with this suspicion. It had already poisoned him, seeped into every thought, every memory of her. Outside the window, the rain turned into a downpour, drumming on the roof. Tom raised his head and looked at the photo on the bedside table: him, Julia, Ethan, and Lily on the beach last summer. They laughed, hugging each other, sand sticking to their feet. Then he thought it was happiness. Now he saw cracks that he had not noticed before, how Julia pulled away from him, how her smile did not reach her eyes. He clenched his jaw, feeling determination boil within him. He's not a weakling. He won't let it break him. If Julia cheats, he will find out the truth, and he will deal with it not like a broken husband, but like a man who knows his worth. But for now, he just sat in silence, listening to the rain and feeling his world crumble around him, piece by piece. The downpour outside the window did not subside, turning the suburb of Mississauga into a blurry gray picture, where houses and trees merged into one continuous spot. Tom sat on the edge of the bed, clutching his phone, the screen of which glowed dimly in the semi-darkness of the bedroom. He stayed up half the night, repeating the same thought in his head. He needed proof. Not words, not excuses, not tears, facts. He wasn't going to make a scene. He wasn't going to yell at Julia or demand an explanation right now. No, he will do it his own way, methodically, quietly, like an engineer who dismantles a complex mechanism to understand where the part broke. He opened the browser on his phone, turning on incognito mode, a small thing, but it gave him the illusion of control. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he decided where to start. DNA test. This was the first thing that came to mind. If Julia is cheating, if she's taking birth control to hide it, then there could be other secrets. Ethan and Lily were his children. He had no doubt about that. Or did he? The thought cut him like a knife, but he forced himself to move on. He found the website of a Canadian company that offered DNA tests delivered to your home. Results in 48 hours. Complete confidentiality, the advertisement read. Tom chose the fastest option, entered the address of their house, and paid for the order with a corporate card, one that Julia had never verified. The parcel was supposed to arrive in 2 days, in a nondescript box disguised as something household. He imagined taking samples from the children's saliva from Ethan's spoon, hair from Lily's pillow, and sending them to the laboratory. This will be the first step. But DNA is only part of the plan. He needed to know what was happening now. Tom switched to another site, an online electronics store with delivery throughout Canada. He scrolled through the home security section and settled on miniature cameras. Small, almost invisible devices with Wi-Fi connection and recording to the cloud. He chose 3, one for the living room, one for the kitchen, and one for the bedroom. They were the size of a coin, with an adhesive backing perfect for hiding among things. The cameras promised clear images, even in the dark, and high-quality sound. Tom added them to the cart and then moved on to the recorders. He chose a model that could be tucked into a bag pocket or under a car seat, a thin black rectangle with a 72-hour battery. The final touch was the phone cloning app. He found it on some dubious forum where users were discussing how to keep an eye on their unfaithful halves. The program promised to duplicate all calls, messages, and even location if installed on the victim's device. To do this, he only needed 5 minutes with Julia's phone in his hands. Tom placed orders, choosing delivery to the address of a small workshop where he repaired equipment. He often received parcels with spare parts there, so no one would be surprised. The sum was considerable, almost $1,000, but he did not hesitate. It wasn't just shopping. This was his plan, his weapon. When he finished, the clock showed 3 in the morning. The rain subsided a little, leaving behind only rare drops flowing down the glass. Tom stood up, went to the window, and looked out onto the street. Lanterns reflected in the puddles, creating flickering spots of light. He felt strange, not broken like last night, but collected, cold. It was as if some internal switch had turned on, and he was now on autopilot. He wasn't going to give up. He wasn't going to be the kind of husband who turned a blind eye to betrayal. If Julia lies to him, he will find out everything, who, when, where, and he will do it without her even suspecting. In the morning, he went down to the kitchen earlier than usual. Chloe was already busy at the stove, preparing oatmeal for the children. Ethan sat at the table, dangling his legs and drawing something on a napkin, and Lily, still sleepy, played with the stuffed bunny in her high chair. Tom poured himself some coffee and sat down opposite his son, trying to look normal. "Dad, look, I drew a tractor." Ethan lifted his napkin, showing a crooked car with huge wheels. "Cool, buddy," Tom smiled, although the smile came out forced. "Looks like the one we fixed last week." Ethan nodded, pleased, and returned to his masterpiece. Tom looked at him, feeling his heart clench. This boy, with his messy brown hair and dimples, was his world, and Lily with her big eyes and quiet laugh. What if? He pushed the thought away. He'll find out soon. Julia entered the kitchen, collected and aloof as always. She wore a gray suit that showed off her slender figure, and her hair was pulled back into a bun. She glanced at Tom, muttered "good morning," and began to pack her bag. He watched her, trying not to reveal his feelings. Her phone lay on the counter, black and shiny, with a password he didn't know. Tom made a mental note to find a way to get to him. "Will you be back late?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Yes, I guess," she answered without looking at him. "Greg has a lot to do before the quarterly report. Don't expect me at dinner." Greg. This name again hurt his ears, but he just nodded. "Fine. Have a nice day." She left, leaving behind a light trail of perfume. Tom followed her with his eyes to the door, feeling something dark boiling inside. He didn't know who Greg Simmons was, but he already hated him. The next 2 days passed in tense anticipation. Tom was working in the workshop, fixing the engine of an old excavator, but his thoughts were far away. The packages began to arrive one after another, first DNA tests disguised as a box of household chemicals, then cameras and a voice recorder in nondescript packages. He took them without attracting attention and hid them in a desk drawer in the workshop. That evening, while Julia was late and Chloe was putting the children to bed, he began to act. First, he installed the cameras. In the living room, he pinned one to the frame of a photograph on a shelf, the one where he and Julia had been at a friend's wedding. The lens peeked out just enough to capture the sofa and the front door. In the kitchen, he hid the second one under a magnet on the refrigerator, among Ethan's childhood drawings. In the bedroom, it was more difficult. He chose a place on the top shelf of the closet, among old boxes of shoes, pointing the camera at the bed. Every time he stuck the device on, he felt a mixture of shame and determination. This was his home, his life, and he turned it into a surveillance zone. He decided to install the recorder later in Julia's bag or in her car, when the chance presented itself. The telephone was the next item. In the evening, when she returned home and left him charging in the living room, Tom waited until she went to the shower. He took the device, connected it to his laptop, and launched the clone program. 5 minutes, that's exactly how long he had, while the water was rustling above. The program loaded, asking for a password. Tom cursed to himself. He didn't know him. But he had a backup plan. He installed a hidden location tracker that did not require access to the system. This will give him at least basic information. When Julia came out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, the phone lay in place as if nothing had happened. She looked at Tom, sitting on the sofa with a mug of tea, and something in her gaze, cold, almost appraising, made him clench his jaw. "You're early today," he said, trying to sound even. "Yes, Greg, let me go early," she answered, brushing her wet hair out of her face. "Tired as a dog." "Poor thing," he managed, feeling the word get stuck in his throat. She didn't notice the sarcasm or pretended not to notice. Tom watched her go into the bedroom and thought of only one thing. His plan was already in motion. The cameras were recording, the tracker was tracking, the DNA tests were lying in the workshop, waiting in the wings. He didn't want confrontation. He wanted the truth, and he will get it no matter the cost. The morning in the Whitmore house began with the usual chaos. Ethan was running around the kitchen with a toy tractor, making loud vroom vroom noises. Lily was smearing yogurt on the high chair, and Chloe was trying to simultaneously clear the table and not step on scattered cubes. Tom sat at the table with his laptop, pretending to check the working drawings, but in fact his eyes kept catching on Julia. She stood by the coffee machine, slender and cool as always, wearing a dark blue dress that showed off her figure. Her movements were precise, polished. She poured coffee into a thermal mug, threw a spoonful of sugar into it, and didn't even look in his direction. "Ethan, please calm down," she said, without raising her voice, but with that icy note that made her son freeze immediately. "I need to go." "Back to Greg?" Tom asked, trying to make it sound like a joke, but everything inside him sank. She turned, giving him a quick glance. "Yes, we have a presentation for clients. It's going to be a long day." "Good luck," he managed, feeling the words scratch his throat. She nodded, grabbed her bag, and walked out, slamming the door. Tom watched her through the window as her car, a silver Toyota RAV4, pulled out of the driveway and disappeared around the corner. He glanced at the laptop. The cameras had been running for 3 days, recording every corner of the house. Nothing suspicious so far, just the usual routine. But he knew that sooner or later something would come up. That evening, after Chloe put the kids to bed, Tom settled into the living room with his laptop connected to the cloud camera storage. "Julia has not yet returned. The presentation has been delayed," she wrote in a short message. He scrolled through the day's notes, speeding up boring moments. Chloe playing with Lily, Ethan building a pillow tower, an empty kitchen. But then he noticed something in the bedroom recording, taken around noon while he was in the workshop. Julia entered the room alone, without a bag, in the same blue clothes as in the morning. She looked tense, and her movements were abrupt. She walked over to the vent above the chest of drawers, the one Tom never touched because it's her territory. Julia pulled something small out of her pocket, a phone, not the one she always carried with her, but another, black, cheap, without a case. She quickly wrote a message, her fingers flickering across the screen, and then stood on her tiptoes and tucked the phone behind the bars, carefully covering it with the edge of the curtain fabric. Then she looked around, as if checking to see if anyone was nearby, and left. Tom froze, looking at the screen. His heart was beating so hard that he could feel it in his throat. Second phone. She was hiding the second phone. He rewinded the recording and watched it again, enlarging the image. This was not her usual iPhone. She always had it with her, in a shiny case with her initials. It was something else, secret. His hand shook, but he forced himself to stand. It's now or never. He went up to the bedroom, trying not to make any noise. Chloe was in her room downstairs, and he didn't want to explain what he was doing. The ventilation grill was old, with peeling paint attached with 2 screws. Tom took a screwdriver from the toolbox he kept in the closet and carefully unscrewed it. The metal creaked, and he froze, listening. Silence. He removed the grate and looked inside. There, in a dusty niche, lay a telephone, small, black, with a worn-back cover. Tom pulled it out, feeling his fingers become sticky with tension. He turned on the device. The screen lit up asking for a PIN code. 4 numbers. Tom tried their wedding date 0715. It didn't work. Ethan's birthday is 0920. Missing again. He swore under his breath, but then remembered. Julia once mentioned that she liked simple combinations. He entered 1234. The screen unlocked. His stomach clenched. Tom connected the phone to his laptop using the cable he always carried with him and launched the clone program. It worked quickly in 10 minutes. All data from the device was copied to its hard drive. He returned the phone to the vent, tightened the grill, and went back down to the living room, locking the door. Opening the files, he started with the messages. The first thing he saw was the name, G. Just a letter without a full name. He opened the correspondence, and every word hit him like a hammer blow. Yesterday was incredible. You know how to turn me on. G. 2314 yesterday. You too. I can't wait for tomorrow. Julia, 11:16 p.m. Tom swallowed, feeling his throat go dry. He scrolled further. Your skin smells like vanilla. I can't get it out of my head. G. 10:32 today. And your hands. You know what they do to me. Julia, 10:34 m. He leaned back on the sofa, closing his eyes. This wasn't just flirting. These were intimate details, the kind that only those who were close to her know. Hands. Leather. Vanilla is her favorite lotion, the one she puts on every morning. Tom remembered how he himself loved this smell, how he hugged her, inhaling it. And now it was someone else's secret. He forced himself to read further. The messages became more frank descriptions of meetings, places where they were. Hotel on Dundas. It was 2 days ago when she said she was late at work. Your car is at the office last week when she was supposedly helping Greg with paperwork. No names were mentioned, but Tom already knew. Greg, her boss, the one whose name she spoke so often that it became part of their daily routine. One message broke him completely. He doesn't suspect anything. We're safe. Julia, 1847, today. Tom threw the laptop onto the couch, not caring that it might fall. He stood up, walked to the window, and pressed his forehead against the cold glass. He was shaking not from anger, but from pain, deep, tearing him from the inside. She didn't just cheat, she laughed at him. He doesn't suspect anything. These words echoed in his head, tearing apart everything he considered his life. When Julia returned home, it was already after midnight. Tom was sitting in the kitchen, pretending to drink tea. She entered, throwing her bag on a chair, and looked at him with slight surprise. Are you awake? She asked, taking off her coat. I couldn't sleep, he answered, looking into her eyes. For the first time, he noticed how she avoided his gaze. How was the presentation? Fine. Tiring, she said, yawning. I'll go to bed. Good night, he called after her, squeezing the mug so that his knuckles turned white. She went upstairs, and he remained sitting, feeling like something huge, irreversible was collapsing inside him. He knew the truth, and now he had to decide what to do with her. Sunlight filtered through the workshop's dirty windows, casting long shadows on the concrete floor, strewn with metal shavings. Tom stood at the workbench, clutching a wrench, but his movements were mechanical, lacking the usual precision. He was trying to tighten a bolt on the engine of an old bulldozer, but the key slipped out of his hands and fell to the floor with a clang. Tom cursed under his breath, leaned over after him, but froze, placing his hands on his knees. My head was buzzing, my thoughts were confused, and words from Julia's correspondence appeared before my eyes again and again. He doesn't suspect anything. Volume, are you okay? A voice came from behind him. He turned around. Michelle Carter, his secretary, stood in the doorway of the workshop, holding a stack of papers in her hands. She was in her early 30s, with short red hair and a sharp gaze that always noticed more than was necessary. She had worked with him for 5 years, ever since he opened the business, and knew him better than anyone at work. Michelle stepped closer, frowning. "You look like you haven't slept in a week," she said, putting the papers on the workbench. "And this is the third time this morning that you've dropped your tools. What's happening?" Tom straightened up, wiping his hands on an oily rag. He wanted to brush it off, say something like, "just tired," but the words stuck in his throat. Michelle crossed her arms, looking at him with that mixture of worry and stubbornness that always made him feel like he was under a microscope. "It's okay, miss," he muttered, looking away. "Just family matters." "Family matters don't make you look like you've been run over by a truck," she retorted, narrowing her eyes. "Come on, lay it out. I see that something is gnawing at you." Tom clenched his jaw, feeling the pressure building inside him. He wasn't going to tell anyone it was too personal, too humiliating. But Michelle stood in front of him, patient and adamant, and suddenly he realized that he could no longer keep it to himself. He tossed the rag onto the workbench and nodded towards the small office in the corner of the workshop. "Okay, let's go," he said quietly. "But this is between us." They walked into the office, a cramped room with a metal desk littered with bills and an old chair that creaked with every movement. Tom closed the door, sat down on a chair, and put his head in his hands. Michelle leaned against the table, silently waiting. "Julia is cheating on me," he finally blurted out, looking up. The words came out heavily, like stones falling into water. "I found evidence. Second phone messages. She is with someone, and this has been going on for a long time." Michelle blinked, but didn't look away. Her face remained calm, although a barely noticeable shadow of sympathy appeared at the corners of her mouth. "Oh my God, Tom," she began, but he interrupted. "That's not all. There are such things, miss. She writes to him about me, that I don't suspect anything, that they are safe." His voice trembled, and he clenched his fists to keep his emotions from escaping. "I installed cameras, cloned the phone. I know everything. And now I don't know what to do." Michelle was silent for several seconds, digesting what she had heard. Then she leaned towards him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You shouldn't keep this to yourself," she said quietly but firmly. "This shit is too big to deal with alone." "Did you tell anyone else?" "No," he shook his head. "And I'm not going to. It's embarrassing, you know. I thought we were fine. And now I'm like a fool who built his life on sand." "You're not a fool," she snapped, straightening up. "You are a man who was betrayed. It's not your fault. But you need a plan, Tom. You can't just sit and eat yourself from the inside." He looked at her, feeling her words break through the fog in his head. Michelle was always straightforward, which was one of the reasons he valued her at work. She didn't babysit, didn't try to feel sorry for him, and now that was exactly what he needed. "I know a woman," she continued, crossing her arms. "Rachel Dalton, advocate, specializes in divorce and family matters. She's been my friend since school. If you want, I can hook you up. She'll help you figure it out." Tom nodded without thinking. "Yes, let's." An hour later, they sat in a small office in downtown Toronto. Rachel Dalton turned out to be a woman in her 40s, with short dark hair and a piercing gaze that seemed to see right through you. Her office was modest but stylish, with a wooden desk, shelves of law books, and a window overlooking a busy street. Michelle remained in the waiting room, and Tom sat opposite Rachel, feeling out of place. "Michelle told me in general terms," Rachel began, opening her notebook. Her voice was calm and businesslike. "But I want to hear from you. What's happening?" Tom explained everything from the foil on the carpet to the second phone and messages. He tried to speak evenly, but towards the end his voice became hoarse. Rachel listened in silence, taking notes without interrupting once. "Okay," she said finally, putting down her pen. "You have evidence this is already a strong position. In Canada, divorces are conducted on a no-fault basis, so her infidelity will not directly affect the division of property. But she could play a role if it comes to disputes about children or child support. You have three options." Tom leaned forward, clasping his hands. "Which?" "First, do nothing," she began, looking into his eyes. "Live as before, pretend that you don't know anything. Some choose this path for the sake of their children or because they are not ready for change. But judging by your appearance, this is not for you." "No," he snapped. "I can't do this." "The second, a peaceful divorce," she continued. "You sit down with her, discuss everything openly, divide property, and agree on children. This requires dialogue, but if she agrees, the process will be quick and relatively clean." Tom imagined this conversation, Julia's cold look, her excuses, her lies. He clenched his fists. "And the third?" Rachel smiled slightly, but there was no warmth in her eyes. "The third is a complete nuclear strike. We use everything you have: records, messages, evidence. We file for divorce demanding maximum custody of the children and a favorable division of property. If she sleeps with her boss, it can be filed as a violation of family obligations, especially if there are financial traces, hotels, gifts, whatever. It's messy, expensive, and emotionally draining. But you will get everything you want." Tom was silent, digesting the words. To do nothing is to betray yourself. An amicable divorce means giving her a chance to get out. Nuclear strike means destroying everything that was between them to the ground. He looked at his hands, still stained with oil from work, and thought about the children. Ethan and Lily, they didn't deserve this, but he didn't deserve to be lied to either. "Give me time to think," he said finally, standing up. "I'll contact you." Rachel nodded. "Decide at your own pace. But don't wait too long. These things tend to explode on their own if left unchecked." Tom returned home at dusk. Chloe met him in the hallway, telling him that the children were sleeping and Julia had not yet returned. He nodded, muttered a thank you, and walked into the living room. I sat on the sofa, looking at the blank TV screen. Three options were spinning in my head like gears in a broken mechanism. Do nothing and live with this pain. Amicable divorce and let her go without a fight. Nuclear strike and destroy everything, but emerge victorious. He heard Julia's car drive up. The door opened and she walked in, throwing her bag on the floor. Her hair was slightly disheveled and her eyes were tired. "Long day?" he asked without turning around. "Yes," she answered, walking past him into the kitchen. Greg again created a circus with reports. Tom clenched his jaw, but remained silent. He looked after her, feeling anger and fatigue fighting inside. She didn't even notice that he was barely holding on. Or she didn't care. He closed his eyes, imagining the three paths that lay before him. And for the first time in a long time, he realized that the decision was already closed. He just had to choose at what cost. The kitchen table was littered with plates of leftovers from dinner: macaroni and cheese for Ethan, mashed potatoes for Lily, a half-eaten piece of chicken that Tom picked at with his fork without much appetite. Julia sat across from him, scrolling through something on her phone, her face illuminated by the bluish light of the screen. Chloe had already gone to her room, leaving them in the familiar evening silence, broken only by the occasional sound of children's voices from the nursery upstairs. Tom looked at his wife, at her calm, almost indifferent expression, and felt something cold, sharp, final brewing inside him. He made a choice. Not the world, not forgiveness, revenge. "You're quiet today," Julia noted, without taking her eyes off the phone. "Something at work?" "Yes," he lied, shrugging his shoulders. "A large order fell through. It's okay." She nodded without even looking at him and went back to her screen. Tom smiled tensely, but convincingly enough not to arouse suspicion. He had already learned to play this role: a loving husband, a tired father, an ordinary Tom Whitmore. But behind that mask, he was building a plan, step by step, like an engineer assembling a machine for destruction. The next day, he began to act. First of all, Tom met with Robert King, his old friend and business partner. Robert was a tall, loud guy with a thick beard and a habit of speaking louder than necessary. They were sitting in a small cafe in downtown Mississauga, away from the prying eyes of the workshop. Cars scurried about outside the window, and inside there was the smell of freshly brewed coffee and pastries. "Are you serious?" Robert leaned back in his chair, looking at Tom over his cup. "Do you want to sell me your share?" "Yes," Tom nodded, keeping his voice even. "I need money for a new project. Something personal. You always wanted complete control over the workshop." Robert narrowed his eyes, but genuine joy flashed in his eyes. "Damn, I've dreamed about this since day one." "But are you sure? This is your brainchild." "I'm sure," Tom said, forcing himself to smile. "You will do everything right. I trust you." They shook hands, and 2 days later the deal was finalized. Tom sold his half of the business for a decent amount, enough that Robert wouldn't ask too many questions, but not so much that it would look suspicious. The money immediately went into a new account opened in the name of a trust that Tom set up through a lawyer recommended by Rachel Dalton. The trust was structured so that Julia could not reach it, a legal fortress hidden behind complex language and nominees. He called it Ethan and Lily, the only thing that was sincere about it. The next step was assets. The house in Mississauga was in the name of both of them, but Tom found a way to withdraw his share. He issued a fictitious debt to Robert, supposedly a business loan, which he was now paying off by pledging his part of the real estate as collateral. It was risky, but Rachel assured him that it would be difficult to argue in court, especially if he prepared all the documents in advance. The car, the bills, even their joint savings, everything was slowly flowing into a trust or into accounts that Julia did not have access to. He did it slowly, secretly, using work hours and late evenings so that no one would notice. At home, he was an exemplary husband. In the morning, he made coffee for Julia while she was getting ready for work, and even joked with her, as before. "You look better today," she said one day, standing at the mirror in the hallway and straightening her hair. "Not so gloomy." "I'm trying," he answered with a slight smile, handing her a thermal mug. "Have a nice day with Greg." She glanced at him quickly to see if there was anything wrong, but said nothing. "I just took the coffee and left." Tom watched her car disappear around the bend and felt his resolve grow stronger inside him. She didn't know that every step she took was now part of his plan. In the evenings, he played with the children, pretending that everything was fine. Ethan showed him his drawings. Lily pulled him by the hand so that he would read her a book about hares. These moments were the only thing that kept him from breaking down. He looked at their faces, so innocent, so trusting, and realized that he was doing this not only for himself, but also for their sake. Julia didn't deserve them. She didn't deserve this life he gave her. 2 weeks later, everything was ready. Money transferred, business sold, assets hidden. Rachel checked the documents and gave the go-ahead. "You built a bomb, Tom. Now all that's left is to press the button." He sat in her office, looking at a stack of papers, powers of attorney, contracts, bank statements. This was his revenge, cold and calculating, like a drawing of a complex mechanism. "When do we serve?" Rachel asked, tapping her pen on the table. "Soon," he replied, looking out the window at the gray Toronto sky. "I want her to feel it. Not just a divorce. Hit." Rachel nodded without arguing. "You know where to find me." He returned home late that night. Julia was already there, sitting in the living room with a glass of wine, leafing through a magazine. She looked up when he entered, and something flashed in her gaze, either surprise or irritation. "Where have you been?" she asked, putting down the magazine. "In the workshop," he lied, taking off his jacket. "Finished some things. Tired as a dog." "Apparently," she said, returning to her wine. "Don't stay there too often, otherwise the children will forget you." Tom smiled thinly, almost imperceptibly. "They won't forget." He walked into the kitchen, poured himself some water, and stood at the sink, looking at his reflection in the dark window. Everything was ready. Assets are hidden, money is withdrawn, documents are signed. He could have filed for divorce tomorrow, but he waited. Not out of fear or doubt, but because he wanted her to understand how deeply he had outplayed her. This was not just revenge, it was a war that he waged quietly while she slept next to her, unaware that her world was about to collapse. Tom finished his water, turned off the light, and went to bed. Lying in the dark next to Julia, he listened to her even breathing and thought about only one thing: soon, very soon. Tuesday morning burst into Tom Whitmore's life with the sharp knock of a mailbox. He was standing in the kitchen, pouring coffee into his old, battered mug, when he heard a sound, a metallic click that on any other day would have gone unnoticed. But not today. He knew what it was. 2 days ago, he sent DNA samples Ethan's saliva from a spoon and a few of Lily's hairs from her pillow to the lab, and now the results are back. Tom set the mug down on the countertop, ignoring the spilled coffee, and walked out to the mailbox by the front door. His hands shook as he pulled out a white envelope with a company logo in the corner. He didn't open it right away, not here, not in front of the neighbors. Instead, he put it in his jacket pocket and returned to the house. Julia had already left for work. Chloe was busy with Lily in the living room, and Ethan was at kindergarten. Tom walked into his small home office, a cramped room with a desk and shelves filled with old drawings. He closed the door, clicking the lock, and sat down, placing the envelope in front of him. For several seconds, he simply looked at him, feeling his heart pounding somewhere in his throat. This was the last piece of the puzzle, the last fact he needed to know before he pulled the trigger on his plan. He took a paper cutter, carefully cut the envelope, and pulled out the folded sheet. The first line was like a blow to the chest. Ethan Whitmore, chance of paternity, 0%. Tom froze, reading the words over and over, as if they might change if he looked more carefully. 0%. Not his son. He swallowed, feeling something clench inside him, and looked lower. Lily Whitmore, chance of paternity, 0%. Ah, 0. So, none of the children were his. He leaned back in his chair, the paper falling from his hands and landing on the table with a quiet rustle. The world around him seemed to slow down, the sounds of the house, Chloe's voice humming some song to Lily, the noise of cars outside the window. Everything became distant, muffled. Tom closed his eyes, but the faces of the children immediately appeared in front of them. Ethan, with his dimples and laughter, Lily, with her big eyes and soft curls. He built a life for them. He rocked them in his arms, changed their diapers, and read fairy tales. And now they were strangers. Not his blood, not his flesh. Anger came first, hot, blind, so strong that he clenched his fists, digging his nails into his palms until it hurt. Julia didn't just cheat on him. She lied from the very beginning. Ethan was born 2 years after their wedding, Lily 5 years later. All this time she was carrying children from another man, and he was a blind fool who built a family on lies. He imagined her face cold, distant, with that slight smile that she gave him when he asked about her day. That smile now seemed like a mockery to him. Behind the anger came pain, deep, tearing, as if someone had pulled out his heart and left an empty hole. He loved them, Ethan and Lily. He loved them more than anything in the world, and this love did not disappear even when the truth lay before him in black and white. They weren't his biological children, but they were his in every moment, in every memory, and now he was losing even that. Tom stood up, went to the window, and pressed his forehead against the cold glass. He wanted to scream, break something, burst into Julia's office, and throw that piece of paper in her face. He wanted to grab her by the shoulders and ask, "How could you?" But he didn't do anything. He stood, breathed, and restrained himself, because he knew, if he failed now, everything he had prepared, the trust, the money, the documents, would collapse. He couldn't let his emotions take over. Not now. Revenge must be cold, precise, like a point-blank shot. He returned to the table, carefully folded the DNA results, and put them in a drawer, locking it with a key. Then he walked out into the living room, where Chloe was still playing with Lily. The little girl looked up at him and handed him her stuffed bunny. "Dad, play," she squeaked, smiling. Tom forced himself to smile back, took the toy, and sat down next to him. "Of course, honey," he said, trying not to let his voice waver. He ran his hand through her hair, feeling his insides tighten. She was not his daughter. But at this moment he could not think about it. He just played with her, listening to her laugh, and kept himself under control. In the evening, Julia returned home as usual with a bag over her shoulder, with a tired expression on her face. Tom met her in the kitchen, where he was preparing dinner, nothing special, just spaghetti with sauce from a jar. He was cutting an onion when she came in, and the knife in his hand almost trembled. "Hi," she said, throwing her bag on the chair. "What does it smell like?" "Dinner," he answered without turning around. "How is the day?" "As always," she shrugged, taking out a bottle of water from the refrigerator. Greg started brainstorming again. "My head is pounding." Tom nodded, continuing to cut the onions. He felt her presence behind him, heard her open the bottle and take a sip. Every sound irritated him, but he kept his face calm. He wanted to turn around, throw the knife on the table, and shout, "Whose children are they, Julia? Who is their father?" But instead he said, "Go rest. I'll figure it out here." She looked at him a short, meaningless look and went into the living room. Tom was left alone, looking at the board with the bow. His hands shook, but he clenched them into fists, took a deep breath, and continued cooking. He won't break down. Not now. He has already transferred assets, sold the business, and prepared documents. The truth about the children was the last straw, but it didn't break his plan, it made it sharper. Later, while Julia was sleeping, Tom sat in the office, looking at the locked drawer. The anger and pain still simmered inside, but he pushed them deeper into a dark corner where they could wait. He won't just divorce her. He will destroy her quietly, methodically, so that she understands that she has lost everything. And he will do this not for himself, but for the sake of the life that she stole from him. Tom woke up to the sound of the alarm clock, but did not immediately open his eyes. He lay in the darkness of the bedroom, feeling a heaviness in his chest that had not left him since the day the DNA results came back. Nearby, Julia was still sleeping. Her breathing was even, almost silent. He turned his head, looking at her silhouette in the faint light of the street lamps filtering through the curtains. She looked calm, almost innocent, just as he had once loved her. But now he knew the truth, and this truth required a name. He got up, quietly dressed, and went down to the kitchen. Chloe was already there, feeding Lily some oatmeal while Ethan played with the blocks on the floor. Tom poured himself some coffee, trying to act normal, but his thoughts were far away. Greg Simmons, Julia's boss, the one whose name came up in her conversations too often to be a coincidence. Tom had no proof yet, but his intuition, supported by correspondence from Julia's phone, pointed to him. Gee, it must be him. After breakfast, he took Ethan to kindergarten, and he went to the workshop, now not his own, but Robert's. But instead of staying there, he told Michelle he had something to take care of, and got into his car. His destination was Julia's office, a glass tower in downtown Toronto, where she worked as Greg Simmons' assistant. He had no intention of going inside or causing a scene. He just needed to see him, find out who this person is who may have ruined his life. Tom parked across the street from the building, in the shadow of a multi-story parking lot, and waited. He turned on the radio to drown out the silence, but could not hear a word from the chatter of the presenters. His gaze was drawn to the entrance to the office. Around noon, he noticed Julia. She came out of the door in the company of a man. Tall, fit, with short dark hair and a confident gait. He was wearing an expensive suit, gray, with a perfectly tied tie. They walked side by side, talking about something, and at some point the man Greg, no doubt, put his hand on the small of her back. It was a fleeting movement, but Tom felt the blood rush to his face. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He pulled out his phone and took a few pictures, trying to keep his hands steady. Then he opened the laptop connected to the tracker he installed on Julia's phone. The location confirmed. She was here, with him, almost every day this week. Tom slammed his laptop shut and leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. Greg Simmons. This name was now not just a sound, it had acquired a face, a body, reality. At home, he decided to check the camera footage. After dinner, when Julia had gone to the bathroom and Chloe was putting Lily to bed, Tom sat in the living room with his laptop. He scrolled through the videos from the past few days, speeding up the boring parts until he came across a recording from last night. A camera in the living room, hidden behind a photo frame, captured a scene that took his breath away. Julia was sitting on the sofa with the children. Ethan sat next to her, holding a tablet in his hands, and Lily lay on her lap, sleepily tugging at her hair. They were watching some cartoon, but then Julia took her phone, the one that was always with her, not a secret one, and dialed a number. The camera recorded the sound clearly. "Hi, Greg," she said, smiling. "Yes, the children are here with me. Do you want to talk to them?" Tom froze, feeling how cold everything inside was. She turned on the speakerphone, and Greg's voice, low, slightly hoarse, filled the room. "Certainly. Hello, guys. How are my little Ethan and Princess Lily doing?" Ethan raised his head from the tablet and joyfully shouted, "Papa Greg, today I built a tower out of blocks. It was taller than me." "Well done, champion," Greg replied, his voice filled with warm mockery. "And you, Lily, what did you do?" Lily giggled, cuddling up to Julia. "Dad, Greg, I drew a bunny." "Clever girl," he laughed. "Will you send me a picture?" "Yes," she squeaked, and Julia smiled, looking at the children with such tenderness that Tom had not seen for a long time. "Okay, Greg, see you tomorrow," she said, ending the call. "Good night." "Good night, guys." "And you, Julie," he replied, and the connection was cut off. Tom turned off the recording, feeling the floor disappear from under his feet. "Papa Greg." The children called him so easily, so naturally, as if it was part of their lives. He rewinded the video and watched it again, listening to every word. Ethan and Lily didn't just know Greg, they loved him. And Julia, she beamed when she spoke to him, as she had not beamed with Tom for years. He closed his laptop and clenched his fists, feeling anger and pain merge into one heated feeling. Greg Simmons is more than just a lover. He is the father of his children, those whom Tom raised as his own. That explained everything. The birth control, the secret phone, her coldness. She didn't just cheat, she built another family right under his nose. Tom stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark street. He wanted to burst into the bedroom where Julia was currently taking a shower and demand answers. I wanted to break something, scream, throw out everything that was boiling inside. But he restrained himself. His plan was almost complete: assets hidden, money withdrawn, documents ready. Now, knowing that Greg is the father, he has the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. When Julia came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, Tom was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch TV. She glanced at him, but didn't say anything, just walked into the bedroom. He followed her with his eyes, feeling something dark, uncontrollable growing inside him. He won't break down. Not now. But she will soon learn what it means to play with him. And Greg, too. The workshop was buzzing with the usual noise. The screech of a grinding machine, the sound of a hammer on metal, the voices of workers shouting over each other. Tom stood at the workbench, looking at the disassembled engine, but his hands remained motionless. The wrench lay nearby, untouched, and images flashed before his eyes instead of details. Ethan shouting, "Papa Greg," into the phone, Lily drawing a bunny for him, Julia smiling the way she hadn't smiled at Tom in years. 9 years. 9 years of marriage, 9 years of life, which he considered his own, turned out to be an illusion, a fragile castle of sand, washed away by one wave of truth. He clenched his jaw, feeling the anger and despair fighting inside him, but not allowing either of them to escape. He couldn't break down here in front of everyone. Robert, now the full owner of the workshop, tapped him on the shoulder as he passed by and said something about an order for next week. Tom nodded, muttering something in response, but the words disappeared into thin air. He didn't care. The business he built was no longer his. The family he loved did too. When the workday ended, Tom did not go home. He couldn't. The thought of entering the house, seeing Julia, the children, knowing that they were not his, was unbearable. Instead, he stayed in the workshop office, closing the door and turning on his laptop. The cameras were still rolling, recording every corner of his former life. He opened the cloud storage, but stopped when the cursor hovered over the folder containing the bedroom notes. There could be new evidence: Julia's conversations on the phone, her whispers in the dark, even more evidence of her betrayal. But he didn't press. He didn't want to see. I didn't want to hear how she talked to Greg, how she made plans, how she laughed at him sleeping a meter away from her. It was too much. He slammed his laptop shut and leaned back in his chair, covering his face with his hands. 9 years. They met at university at a party where she spilled beer on him and laughed, apologizing. He fell in love with her sharp mind, her coldish smile, the way she knew how to keep everyone at a distance except him, as it seemed to him then. They married 2 years later. Ethan was born soon after, Lily another 3. He built a house for them, worked until the night so that the business would take off, took the children fishing, even when he didn't want to, because it was family. And all this time she was carrying children from someone else. All this time he was not a husband, not a father, but a decoration in her play. The office door creaked and Tom looked up. Michelle stood in the doorway, holding 2 bottles of beer. Her red hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, and her face showed a mixture of fatigue and worry. "Are you still here?" she asked, entering uninvited. "Rob said you've been like a zombie all day." Tom tried to smile, but it came out crooked. "I was just thinking." Michelle placed 1 bottle in front of him and sat on the edge of the table, opening hers. "Don't lie to me, Tom. I know you too well. What's happened?" He looked at the beer, then at her. She was the first to whom he told about Julia, the first who did not feel sorry for him, but simply supported him. And now that the truth about the children crushed him, he realized that he could not keep it to himself. "They're not mine, miss," he said quietly, looking at the floor. "Ethan and Lily. The DNA test has arrived. None of them are mine." Michelle froze, the bottle stopping halfway to her lips. She lowered it slowly, her eyes widened, but she didn't look away. "Oh my God, Tom," she breathed. "You are sure?" He nodded, pulling the folded results sheet out of his pocket and throwing it on the table. 0%. Both. Michelle took the paper, ran her eyes along the lines, then put it back. She was silent for a few seconds, and then leaned towards him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "This is bullshit, Tom. Real shit. But you are not alone, do you hear? I'm here." He looked up, meeting her eyes. There was no pity in them, only strength, which he now so lacked. He nodded, feeling the lump in his throat go away a little. "I don't know how to live with this," he admitted, squeezing the bottle in his hands. 9 years, miss. I thought this was my family. And now, I don't even want to watch the tapes. They're in the bedroom. I'm afraid I'll see something I can't wash away." Michelle squeezed his shoulder tighter. "Then don't look. You already know enough. Don't tear your soul more than necessary." He opened the beer and took a sip, feeling the cold bitterness slide down his throat. "They call him Papa Greg. I heard it on camera. Greg Simmons. Her boss. This is him." Michelle swore under her breath as she leaned back. "This bitch. Sorry, Tom, but she crossed all boundaries. You don't deserve this." "Nobody deserves it," he answered, looking at the bottle. "But I can't just leave. I'm preparing everything to hit her. Trust, money, documents. I want her to be sorry." "And rightly so," Michelle said, her voice becoming harsher. "She played with you for 9 years. Now it's your turn. But don't forget about yourself, okay? You are stronger than you think." Tom looked at her, feeling her words settle somewhere inside him, like an anchor in a storm. For the first time in recent days, he didn't feel alone. He nodded, taking another sip. "Thank you, miss," he said quietly. "You're the first one who doesn't look at me like I'm broken." "Because you're not broken," she snapped, picking up the bottle. "You're in hell, but you're still holding on, and I won't let you fall." They sat in silence, finishing their beer as dusk fell outside the window. Tom didn't know what would happen next, but at that moment he decided one thing. He would not watch the video from the bedroom. The truth was enough for him. Now he had to turn his pain into a weapon, and he would do it, step by step, with the cold clarity that this evening had given him. Tom stood at the window of his office in the workshop, looking at the gray asphalt of the parking lot, covered with a thin layer of morning frost. He held a mug of cold coffee in his hands, but didn't drink it. He just held it to keep his hands occupied. In recent days, he worked like a machine. He slept for 3 hours, ate on the go, lived for one goal: to collect a dossier that would be his final blow. He didn't see the video from the bedroom, but the rest was enough. Every piece of truth, every piece of evidence added up to a heavy, irrefutable weight that he was preparing to bring down on Julia and Greg. The first thing he did was hire a private detective. Rachel recommended a guy named Dan Marlowe, a short ex-cop with a bald head and a sharp gaze that said he had seen everything in life and more. Tom met him at a diner on the outskirts of Toronto, away from familiar places. He gave Dan everything he had: a photo of Greg and Julia outside the office, tracker data from Julia's phone, a copy of the correspondence from the secret phone. Dan listened in silence, sipping his black coffee, and nodded. "Give me a week," he said, putting the papers away in his battered briefcase. "I'll find where they meet, with whom, when. If there is money or gifts, I will take that out too." 6 days later, Dan returned with a report. The envelope contained photographs: Julia and Greg in a cafe on Dundas Street, their hands intertwined under the table. They are at the entrance to the Sheraton Hotel in the city center. He puts his arm around her waist. Receipts from the jewelry store where Greg bought earrings for $2,000. Tom recognized them. Julia wore them last week, saying that they are old. Dan even dug up the address of an apartment in North York that Greg rented in his name, where Julia went 3 times in a month when she was working late. The report was dry and matter-of-fact, but every word in it cut Tom like a knife. He added the DNA results to the file, zeros burned into the paper like a brand. Photos of the kids from their last trip to Lake Ontario: Ethan with a fishing rod, Lily with a sand bucket, now lay next to those zeros, reminding him of what he had lost. Camera footage from the living room, where the children called Greg Papa Greg, was also included in the folder. Their voices were digitized and saved on a flash drive. It was more than evidence. It was the story of his illusion put together. Rachel Dalton took on the case with the cold determination of a surgeon. They met in her office on Friday morning, behind closed doors. Tom laid out a dossier in front of her, a thick folder, tied with an elastic band, and a flash drive. Rachel flipped through the documents, looked at the photos, and listened to the audio. Her face remained expressionless, only her eyebrows raised slightly when she got to the DNA tests. "This is not just a scam, Tom," she said, putting the folder aside. "This is war, and we have everything to win. This is what I suggest." She filed 3 claims. The first is against Julia, a divorce demanding full custody of the children based on her moral behavior and deception regarding paternity, plus the division of property in favor of Tom due to his financial investments in the family. The second is against Greg Simmons, a claim for emotional damages for interference with marriage and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The third was against the company where Julia worked, the large law firm Simmons and Hart. Rachel found a loophole. If Greg used his official position to have an affair with a subordinate, it was a violation of corporate ethics, and the company could be sued for negligence in supervision. The compensation amounts were astronomical. Rachel called it a nuclear strike with a margin. "We'll serve everything at the same time," she said, tapping her pen on the table. "They won't have time to come to their senses. Are you ready?" Tom nodded, feeling something settling inside him, becoming hard. "Yes, do it." Michelle took over the other part of the planned public exposure. They were sitting in a cafe after work, away from the workshop, with a laptop and 2 cups of coffee. Tom gave her a copy of the file, removing only the legal documents that could harm the claims. Michelle looked at him with the same determination as the night he told her about the children. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked, opening the folder. This is not just a blow to her. It's an explosion of her whole world. She blew mine, he answered, looking into her eyes. Let him feel it now. Michelle nodded and got to work. She composed a letter short but poisonous, with excerpts from the correspondence between Julia and Greg, photos from the detective's report, and scans of DNA tests. Julia Whitmore and Greg Simmons deceived Tom for 9 years, passing off other people's children as his own, it began. She emailed it to Julia's relatives, her sister in Ottawa, her parents in Kingston, even her great-aunt who was visiting for Christmas one year. Friends in their old circle, those they went to barbecues or bowling with, also received copies. Michelle found their church Facebook group, where Julia sometimes went for show, and sent an email to the pastor with a note, maybe she should confess. Then she moved on to social media. After creating an anonymous account, she posted everything on Twitter and Instagram using the hashtags #CheatingScandal and #FamLiveTrail. Photos of Julia and Greg outside the hotel, cropped so that their faces were recognizable, went viral within hours. She even sent an anonymous tip to a local news blog that loved scandal. Look what's going on at an elite law firm, she wrote, attaching a scan of a receipt from a jewelry store. Done, Michelle said, closing her laptop. By morning, it will be everywhere. Tom nodded, feeling strangely empty. Thank you, miss. You're welcome, she replied, squeezing his hand. She deserved it. At home, Tom behaved as usual. He arrived late, when Julia was already sitting in the living room with a glass of wine. She looked up but didn't say anything, just nodded in response to his hello. He walked into the kitchen, poured himself some water, and stood at the sink, listening to her flip through the pages of a magazine. Everything was ready. The dossier was collected, lawsuits were written, incriminating evidence was sent out. Tomorrow Rachel will file papers in court, and by noon social media will explode. Julia did not yet know that her world had already begun to collapse. Monday started with a deceptively quiet dawn. The skies over Mississauga were clear for the first time in a week, and the sun's rays streamed through the curtains, streaking the hardwood floor of the living room. Tom sat on the sofa, holding a mug of coffee in his hands, but did not drink. He just watched the steam rise and dissolve in the air. The clock on the wall showed 9:45. In 15 minutes, everything will begin. He felt it like a stretched string, ready to snap. Julia had already left for work, throwing him the usual "see you in the evening" over her shoulder. She did not know that this morning would be the last in her former life. At 10 o'clock, Rachel Dalton filed claims. 3 folders of documents landed on the desk of a court clerk in downtown Toronto: a divorce from Julia, a lawsuit against Greg Simmons, and a claim against Simmons and Hart. At the same time, the courier delivered the subpoenas, one to Julia's office, the other to Greg's house in North York. Tom didn't see it with his own eyes, but Rachel promised to keep him posted. He waited, looking at the phone that lay next to him on the couch cushion. The first message came from Michelle at 10:12. Twitter has exploded. Her name is trending. People are sharing photos from the hotel like a virus. Tom opened the app and saw that the hashtag #JuliaHitMorcheats had already received thousands of retweets. Someone posted a screenshot of her LinkedIn profile next to a photo from the dossier. Someone wrote, "This is what happens when you sleep with your boss." The church's Facebook group was abuzz, with a pastor publicly condemning the sinful behavior and her Ottawa sister commenting, "I'm shocked. How could you?" Julia's reputation was crumbling in real time, and Tom felt a cold sense of satisfaction as he watched it. At the Simmons and Hart office, Julia's morning began as usual. She was sitting at her desk, going through letters for Greg, when there was a knock on the door. It was Emily, the HR manager, a short woman with a tense face. There was a guard behind her. "Julia, we need to talk," Emily said, her voice dry as paper in her hands. "Let's go to the conference room." Julia frowned but stood up, straightening her skirt. She didn't understand what was happening until she entered the hall and saw Greg there. He sat at the table, pale, with compressed lips, and in front of him lay a stack of papers. The firm's senior partner, Martin Hart, stood nearby, his face stony. "What is this?" Julia asked, feeling anxiety rising inside her. Emily placed an envelope with a subpoena in front of her. You're being fired. Immediately. With things on the way out. What? Julia blinked, her voice trembling. For what? Martin spoke, his tone icy. For violating corporate ethics. Your affair with Greg is one thing, but the evidence that came to light this morning. The photos, the messages, the social media scandal, it threatens the firm's reputation. We received a claim from your husband. You're fired, Julia. Greg, too. Greg raised his head, his eyes flashing with anger. This is nonsense, Martin. We'll figure it out. No, you won't figure it out, Martin snapped, throwing a folder in front of them. Here's the dossier sent by Tom Whitmore's lawyer. DNA tests, photos, records. You're both in deep trouble. Julia opened the folder with trembling hands. The first thing she saw was the DNA results. Probability of paternity, 0%. Her gaze darted to Greg, then back to the papers. Photos from the hotel, screenshots of correspondence, detective report. She recognized every detail, every moment that she considered secret now lay before her, like evidence in court. Her face turned white. Tom. She breathed, but her voice broke. Get your things, Emily said, nodding to the guard. You have 10 minutes. Julia left the hall, feeling her legs give way. Her colleagues looked at her, some with curiosity, others with contempt. Her phone was already buzzing with notifications, messages from friends, an angry call from her mother, Instagram posts with her face on them. She got into the car, clutching the summons, and realized that this was just the beginning. Tom was at home when she returned. He heard the front door slam and saw her in the doorway of the living room disheveled, with red eyes, with a bag thrown on the floor. She looked like the world had collapsed beneath her feet, and it was true. Tom, she began, her voice trembling. We need to talk. This is some kind of misunderstanding. I can explain. He looked up from the mug he was still holding in his hands and looked at her. For the first time in weeks, he saw the real her, not cold, not distant, but broken. But there was no pity inside him, only ice. I don't want to talk, he said evenly, standing up. You have received a summons. Read. Everything I needed to say is there. Tom, please, she stepped towards him, holding out her hand. It's not what you think. Not what I think, he interrupted, his voice becoming harsher, but not louder. Do DNA tests lie? Do the photos lie? The kids call Greg Papa Greg. Is that also a misunderstanding? She froze, her hand falling. Do you know? I know everything, he said, looking into her eyes. 9 years, Julia. You stole 9 years from me. Now you'll pay for it. There is nothing more to say. He turned and walked towards the stairs, leaving her standing in the middle of the room. She shouted something after him, a plea, an excuse he couldn't understand, but he didn't stop. Walking up to his office, he closed the door and sat down at his desk, staring at the blank laptop screen. The phone vibrated. Rachel. Claims have been filed. Summons have been served. We're in the game. Tom leaned back in his chair, feeling the tension in his chest give way to a strange emptiness. The destruction has begun. Julia lost her job, her reputation, her control. But he felt no joy, only fatigue and a cold confidence that this was not the end. He refused to speak to her, not out of weakness, but out of strength. The words didn't mean anything anymore. Now his plan spoke. Tom woke up to the sound of footsteps on the stairs. He was lying on the sofa in the living room, covered with an old blanket that smelled of dust and coffee. He hadn't slept much in recent days. After he'd refused to talk to Julia, he'd slept downstairs, avoiding the bedroom where her presence still lingered in the air. The clock said 6:30 a.m. Too early to wake up normally, but he heard her coming down and tensed. The door to the living room swung open and Julia walked in, dressed in a robe and holding a telephone receiver in her hand. Her face was pale, her eyes were red, but a mixture of anger and despair burned in them. You need to leave, she said, her voice shaking but firm. I submitted a request for a temporary ban. The lawyer said that after everything you have arranged, they will give me a house and children until the court sorts things out. Tom sat down, throwing away the blanket. He had expected this. Rachel had warned that Julia might hit back, using emotional leverage and the children. But he didn't flinch. He looked at her, feeling a cold emptiness inside. "Ban," he asked, standing up. "Do you think this will stop what has already started?" "Get out, Tom," she snapped, clutching the phone until her knuckles turned white. "I'm not joking. The police will be here in an hour if you don't leave yourself." He nodded without arguing. There was no point in arguing. She had already lost too much to retreat, and he was not going to give her a reason to make him out to be the aggressor. He went up to the office, collected a laptop, several folders with documents and car keys. 15 minutes later, he stood at the front door with a small bag slung over his shoulder. Julia watched him from the kitchen, arms crossed, but said nothing. One last look at the house, at the walls he painted with his own hands, at Ethan's toys scattered along the stairs, and he left, slamming the door. Michelle was waiting for him at home in a modest two-room apartment in the east end of Mississauga. She opened the door without asking questions, simply nodded and stepped back to let him inside. The apartment was cozy but cramped, a sofa with faded upholstery, a small table with a bunch of magazines, the smell of freshly brewed coffee. Tom threw his bag against the wall and collapsed on the sofa, feeling the fatigue falling heavily on him. "She kicked you out?" Michelle asked, placing the mug in front of him. "Yes," he answered, looking at the ceiling. "Restraining order. The house is now hers until the court decides." Michelle sat down opposite her, crossing her legs. "How are you?" "Like a bankrupt," he grinned, but there was no fun in his voice. "She thinks she won. She took the house, the children, everything. But she doesn't know that there is nothing there." Michelle narrowed her eyes, and he continued, feeling the words come out of their own accord. "All property in an offshore fund. The house is mortgaged against a fictitious debt to Robert. The business is sold. The accounts are empty. Legally, I am a beggar. I don't have anything she can take. But in reality, everything is under control." She whistled, leaning back. "You're a fucking genius, Tom. It's like chess, but with a nuclear bomb instead of a queen." Rachel said so. He nodded, rubbing his temples. "Julia will get the house, but it is depreciated. Money in trust in the Cayman Islands. She won't get to them even if she wins the trial." Michelle smiled subtly, with a hint of admiration. "So what now? Are you just living with me while she celebrates defeating a dummy?" "For now, yes," he answered, looking at the mug. "The court will deal with the claims. Rachel says we're ironclad, and I'm just waiting." Julia really was celebrating, or she thought she was celebrating. By noon, the police came to the house, made sure Tom was gone, and left, leaving her with a temporary warrant in hand. She called Greg, her voice shaking with relief as she said, "He's gone. The house is mine." She did not know that the bank had already sent a notice of debt on the debt to Robert, which Tom had registered as collateral. Unbeknownst to her, their joint savings, the ones she had planned to use, had disappeared, transferred to an offshore fund through a chain of transactions that Rachel disguised as business expenses. Legally, Tom was bankrupt. His credit rating collapsed. His assets were reset to zero. But in reality, he kept everything in his hands, hiding behind a wall of complex financial schemes. He sat with Michelle, watching her small TV, where some old series was playing. She brought the pizza from delivery, put the box on the table, and sat down next to him. "Don't you regret it?" she asked, tearing off a piece. "Home, children, all this." Tom took a piece, but didn't eat it, just held it in his hands. "Do I regret it? No. This is not my home anymore, and the children." He fell silent, feeling his throat tighten. "They are not mine, miss, but I love them. This is the only thing I regret, that I cannot take this love back." She looked at him, her gaze softening. "You don't have to be made of steel, you know. You might break. I won't turn you in for this." "Not now," he said, putting down the pizza. "I'll break down later, when it's all over." Michelle nodded without arguing. They sat in silence, eating pizza, watching TV, and Tom felt strangely calm. He was kicked out of the house he was building, but he lost nothing of value. Everything real was hidden, protected, ready for the final blow. Julia thought she had won by taking the empty shell. She didn't know that he had already rewritten the rules of the game. Later, after Michelle had gone to bed, Tom opened his laptop and checked the trust account. The numbers glowed on the screen more than 1 million, withdrawn from business and assets, beyond the reach of the court. He closed the lid and lay down on the sofa, looking at the ceiling. Bankrupt on paper, genius in the shadows. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. Julia had not yet seen the real end. Tom woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee that Michelle was brewing in her small kitchen. He lay on her sofa, which had already become his temporary home, and looked at the cracks in the ceiling that he had learned to understand in recent weeks. Outside the window, morning Toronto was noisy car horns, the distant barking of a dog, the voices of neighbors. But there was silence inside him, heavy and cold, as if part of his soul had frozen after everything he had done. He achieved his goal. Julia and Greg were destroyed. His plan worked flawlessly. But the victory did not bring joy, only emptiness and questions about what now. Michelle came into the living room with 2 mugs, placed one in front of him, and sat down on a chair, pulling her knees to her chest. Her red hair was disheveled, but her eyes glowed with the same energy that had kept him from drowning in recent months. "You look like a person who won the war, but forgot why he fought," she said, taking a sip of coffee. Tom took the mug, feeling the warmth through the ceramic. "Maybe so," he answered, looking into the dark liquid. "Rachel called yesterday. Greg's company agreed to a pre-trial settlement. They paid compensation." Michelle whistled. "How many?" "500,000, he said quietly, "plus an apology in writing. They want to hush up the scandal." She leaned forward, her eyebrows raised. "500,000? Damn, Tom, this is a win. What's wrong with Greg?" "Fired," he answered, his voice flat, almost mechanical. "No severance pay, no pension. His name is now toxic. No company in Toronto will take him after social media broke the story. Reputation in tatters." Michelle nodded, but her gaze became more serious. "And Julia?" Tom squeezed the mug a little tighter. "She's alone. Greg left her as soon as he realized he was losing everything. Without a job, without support, with debts on a house that I mortgaged. She tried to call, right, but I didn't answer. Rachel says her lawyer is panicking. They have no chance in court." Michelle put her coffee down and looked at him carefully. "You achieved everything you wanted. Why then such a face?" He shrugged, feeling the question scratch something inside him. "Because it didn't give me back anything. Ethan and Lily. They're not mine. The house is not mine. 9 years are empty. I won, but what do I have left?" Michelle was silent for a few seconds, then stood up, walked over to the sofa, and sat down next to him, so close that he felt the warmth of her shoulder. "You have you, Tom? You went through hell and didn't break. This is not the end, you know? This is the beginning." He looked at her, expecting a trick, but there was only sincerity in her eyes. "The beginning of what?" "Whatever you choose," she said, her voice becoming firmer. "You don't have to live in this emptiness. You can build something new. Present." Tom thought about her words all day. He sat in Rachel's office, signing the final papers on the settlement with Greg's company. 500,000 was already in the trust account, along with money from the sale of businesses and assets enough to start life again anywhere. Rachel closed the file and looked at him over her glasses. "You did the impossible," she said. "Legally, you crushed them. Julia is left with nothing. Greg is a parody of his former self. What's next?" "I don't know," he answered honestly. "For the first time in months, I don't have a plan." Rachel smiled, a rare, almost warm smile. "Maybe this is for the best. Give yourself time." But Michelle wasn't going to give him time to think. That evening, as they sat at her place with pizza and beer, she spoke again, and her words caught him off guard. "I was thinking," she began, tearing off the crust from a piece. "You always wanted to be a father. Hereby, not just those who raise other people's children." Tom froze, the beer bottle stopping halfway to his lips. "I wanted to." "And what?" "Vasectomy," she said, looking into his eyes. She can be turned. I read it. The procedure is complicated, but there are chances. You can become a father again. Your children, Vol. Not with Julia, not with her lies, with someone who will be honest with you. He placed the bottle on the table, feeling her words break through the ice inside. Reverse vasectomy? Are you serious? Absolutely, she nodded. You don't have to end your story here. You deserve a family. The real one. Tom was silent, digesting what he had heard. He had a vasectomy after Lily, thinking their marriage was complete. It seemed like the right decision at the time Julia convinced him they were ready. Now he knew why she was so insistent. But the thought of regaining this opportunity, of one day holding his child in his arms, his by blood, in truth lit a spark in him that he had thought had long been extinguished. It's not tomorrow, Michelle added, noticing his silence. But think about it. You are not bankrupt, not a victim. You are Tom Whitmore, who outplayed everyone. And you can start again. A week later, he made an appointment with a urologist. The doctor, an older man with bushy eyebrows and a calm voice, explained that vasectomy reversal was possible but not guaranteed. The chances depended on time 3 years had passed, which was within the good window. The procedure required money, recovery, and patience, but Tom nodded without hesitation. I want to try, he said, signing his consent. Not right now, but I want to know what I can do. The doctor smiled. This is the right attitude. Tom left the clinic feeling the fresh air of Toronto fill his lungs. For the first time in months, he looked forward instead of behind. Greg was destroyed, no job, no pension, no name. Julia was left alone with an empty house and a broken reputation. And he was free. Not rich, not happy yet, but free to choose what to become next. Returning to Michelle, he told her about the consultation. She raised her mug of tea like a toast. For you, Tom, she said, smiling, for a new start. He lifted his mug, feeling something inside him begin to thaw. For this, he answered quietly. The divorce dragged on like an endless winter, cold, exhausting, full of harsh winds and gray days. The court hearings lasted for months. Each of them was like a hammer blow on already cracked glass. Julia struggled, clinging to the remnants of her ruined life. She hired a lawyer who tried to challenge Tom's claims, accusing him of financial fraud and emotional abuse. But the evidence Tom and Rachel collected was irrefutable: DNA tests, records, detective reports, correspondence. The judge, an elderly woman with tired eyes and a stern voice, rendered a verdict in Tom's favor. The divorce was finalized, the property was divided according to its terms, Julia was left with the house, which was now burdened with debt, and he was officially free. But freedom did not come alone. With it came a melancholy, deep and sharp, like a knife. Ethan and Lily, the children he raised, whom he loved despite the truth, remained with Julia. The court did not give him custody. He was not their biological father, and although Rachel tried to use the moral aspect, the law was unforgiving. Tom saw them for the last time before the final meeting, when he took the rest of his things from the house. Ethan rushed to him, hugged his legs, and asked, "Dad, will you come back?" Lily stood nearby, clutching her stuffed bunny, and looked with big eyes, in which tears glistened. Tom knelt down and hugged them both, feeling his heart break. "I will always love you," he said, his voice trembling, but he held it in. "You are mine, even if I can't be with you every day." Julia watched from afar, her face tense, but she did not intervene. He left without looking back, because he knew that if he looked back, he would not be able to take the next step. Michelle met him at home with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. The divorce was finalized in the morning, and Tom came to her straight from court, with a folder of papers in his hands and an emptiness in his chest. She poured the whiskey, handed him the glass, and raised hers. "For freedom," she said, her voice soft but firm. Tom took the glass, looked at the amber liquid, and nodded. For freedom. They drank, and the warmth of the alcohol spread through his body, softening the sharp edges of the pain. He sat down on the sofa, threw his head back, and closed his eyes. The divorce was long, almost a year of legal battles, accusations, Julia's tears in the courtroom, her attempts to regain his trust, which he did not accept. But now it's over. He was free from her, from the lies, from the illusion that had held him for 9 years. And for the first time in that time, he felt the air become lighter, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "They miss you," Michelle said, sitting down next to her. "I saw him and Chloe in the park last week." Ethan asked where you were. Lily was drawing something and said it was for Daddy. Tom opened his eyes, feeling the longing squeeze his throat. "I miss them too. Every day. Sometimes I wake up and think I hear their voices downstairs, and then I remember." Michelle put her hand on his shoulder, her touch warm, grounding. "You haven't lost them forever. They know who raised them, who loved them. It won't go away." He nodded, but the words were stuck inside. Ethan and Lily were part of his soul, and although he wasn't their father by blood, he was in every other way. Julia could take them physically, but she couldn't erase the years he spent with them, nights at their crib, morning hugs, their laughter in the backyard. It was his, and he held on to it, even if the pain of their absence cut him every day. Later, when the whiskey was gone, Tom went out onto Michelle's balcony. The night was cold. The stars shone brightly over the sleeping city. He breathed in the frosty air, feeling it fill his lungs, and for the first time in months he smiled, not forcedly, not for show, but sincerely. Freedom. It was bitter, mixed with longing for the children, but it was real. He was no longer Julia's husband, no longer a pawn in her game. He was Tom Whitmore, a man who had been through hell and came out the other side. Michelle joined him, wrapped in an old sweater. "What's next?" she asked, looking out at the lights of Toronto. "I don't know," he answered, leaning on the railing. "Maybe I'll start again. I have money from compensation, from a trust. I can discover something new, or go somewhere. But first, I want to live. Just live, without plans, without revenge." She smiled, her eyes sparkling in the darkness. "Sounds like a great plan. And you're not alone, you know. I'm with you." Tom looked at her, feeling a warmth he didn't expect. Michelle was his anchor in this chaos, not just a friend, but something more that he was not yet ready to name. He nodded without saying anything, and they stood there, looking at the city that lay before them, full of possibilities. Tom sat at Michelle's small kitchen table, watching her cut apples for the pie. A light rain was drizzling outside the window, the drops knocking on the glass, creating a soft rhythm that filled the silence. The divorce had been over for a week now, and he was still getting used to the feeling of freedom, how easy it was to breathe, even if the longing for Ethan and Lily sometimes tightened his chest. Michelle hummed something under her breath. Her movements were confident, almost dancing, and Tom found himself staring at her longer than usual. Her red hair fell in front of her face, and she brushed it back with the back of her hand, and there was something about that simple gesture that made his heart flutter. She noticed his gaze, stopped, and smiled, not the sharp, businesslike smile that he was used to seeing at work, but a soft, almost timid one. Michelle put the knife down, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked over to the table, sitting down opposite him. Her green eyes met his, and there was something new in them, a warmth, a depth that he had not noticed before. "What?" he asked, feeling the corners of his lips involuntarily rise. She hesitated, looked down at her hands, then looked back at him. "I want to say something, and perhaps now is the time." Tom leaned forward, instinctively feeling that this was important. "Speak." Michelle took a deep breath, as if gathering her courage. "I've been waiting for you for 9 years, Tom, since the day you hired me in the workshop. You were married, you had a family, and I never interfered or tried to destroy anything. But you have always been my ideal. Strong, honest, even when everything went to hell. I saw how you fight, how you hold on, and all this time I just waited." Her words hung in the air, heavy and light at the same time. Tom froze, feeling how they settled in him, like stones in still water. 9 years. While he was building an illusion with Julia, Michelle was nearby, not just a secretary, not just a friend, but a woman who saw the real him. He remembered her views, her support, those moments when she stayed with him late in the workshop, helping with papers, although she could have gone home. Then he did not attach any importance to it, but now everything has formed a clear picture. Misha. He began, but she raised her hand, stopping him. Don't say anything yet, she said, her voice wavering. I don't expect you to understand or answer everything right now. Just know that you are more to me than you know, and now that you are free, I don't want to be silent anymore. Tom looked at her, feeling something shift inside. Years of pain, betrayal, loneliness, all this receded, leaving room for something new. He stood up, walked around the table, and stopped in front of her. Michelle looked up, her breathing a little faster, but she didn't look away. He reached out and touched her cheek, feeling the warmth of her skin under his fingers. And then he leaned over and kissed her. It was not a harsh, not a desperate kiss, it was soft, deep, full of what they both had been holding inside for too long. Her lips answered him, at first hesitantly, then with the same force, and Tom felt the ice in his chest melt, giving way to a warmth that he had not known for years. He pulled away, but not far, their faces remained close, their breathing mingled. 9 years, he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. Did you really wait? True, she answered, smiling through the tears that sparkled in the corners of her eyes. And I would wait longer if I had to. Tom pulled her to him, hugging her so tightly, as if he was afraid that she would disappear. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he could build something real, not an illusion, not a lie, but a life based on truth. Michelle hugged him back, her hands sliding down his back, and he realized this was more than just a moment. This was the beginning. They sat back down at the table, but closer now, their knees touching each other. Michelle took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his, and looked at him with the same warm smile. How many children should we have? She asked suddenly. Her tone was light, almost joking, but sincere hope flashed in her eyes. Tom froze, and then smiled for the first time in months. It was a real, open smile that reached his eyes. He imagined it. Small steps around the house, laughter that would fill the void, a family he could call his own. After a vasectomy, which he planned to reverse, this was possible. And with Michelle, a woman who had seen him at his worst and still chose him, it felt right. 2, he said, squeezing her hand. A boy and a girl. What do you think? She laughed, her laughter clear as the ringing of a bell. Agreed, but I choose names. Not something strange. He played along, feeling the warmth spreading through his chest. They sat there, laughing and talking, until the rain outside the window subsided, giving way to the weak sun. Tom looked at Michelle, at her face, illuminated by the soft light, and realized this was what he had been waiting for, without even knowing it. The freedom he had gained after his divorce now made sense. With her, he could build something real, not just a house, not just a family, but a life where there would be no room for lies. And for the first time in a long time, he believed that the future could be bright. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.